Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Books and Books. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables this evening on the internet. My name is Steve. On behalf of everyone here at Books and Books, we welcome you. Please take a moment tonight when you're buying your copy of your book to pick up a copy of our Books and Books newsletter. This will give you a synopsis of all the wonderful events we have at Books and Books every night of the week. We do about 60 events every month. There's usually something for everyone's taste. We have Spanish events, kids events, poetry readings, first-time authors, celebrity signings. There's always an event, as I say, for everyone's taste. You can also go to the internet and give us your email address, and that way we can alert you to everything that goes on so you don't miss anything. I also remind you that flash photography interferes with the live streaming event that we have tonight, so if you could refrain from that. I encourage you to visit our site for more information, or, as I say, give us your email address and you won't miss a thing. You can also call the number on your screen for a signed copy of tonight's book. While the event is in progress, we'll ship it to you for free of charge for the shipping anywhere in the United States. Overseas might be a little bit more expensive. And you can also call and even ask a question of the author while the event is in progress. So that's also a nice benefit of watching it online. But tonight we are very happy to have with us Francine Mary Netter and Medicine's Michelangelo. It's the remarkable and first major biography of Frank Netter, MD, written by his daughter. She captures the character of a man and tells his life story, not only using her remembrances, but also Frank Netter's own autobiographical notes, personal correspondence, and private files. Publications of his work in public archives and more than 100 interviews with family members, artists, distinguished practitioners, and scientists, one of which we have in-house tonight. To formally introduce our author, give a warm welcome for her colleague. He's on the faculty of the University of Miami. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Murray Epstein.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here and introduce Francine Netter to discuss her book, Medicine's Michelangelo. Just a word about how I became involved early on. I was privileged to collaborate with Frank Netter in, I guess, the mid-'80s, 85 or so, on one of his clinical symposia. As Ms. Netter will relate, the sponsor of those iconic clinical symposia was the SIBA Foundation. And I received a call from Mary McKinsey, which will probably reverberate and you will remember well, saying, would you like to collaborate with Frank Netter, and you can write and he will paint an issue on the renal complications of liver disease? I said yes. And so this afforded me an opportunity to interact with him intellectually and scientifically on this topic. And I was intrigued when the book became available, and I was able to read it and look, and it's an amazing story. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Francine Netter, who will talk about the book and about the career of her father. Francine, welcome.
Well, this is the book. Thank you. I'm just delighted to be here to talk about Frank Netter. You know, they called him Medicine's Michelangelo, and they called him the Dean of Medical Illustration. Thank you. And they called him the greatest medical illustrator. But I called him Daddy. He had a large art studio in the family home, and as a child I would go there and spent many hours with him while he painted his beautiful pictures. I would go there with some regularity, and if he was painting a picture of the heart, he would explain to me how it worked to circulate the blood, or if he was painting a picture of the stomach, he would tell me about how it functioned in digestion. And even as a little child I could understand some of these principles, and you know, it was the pictures that told the story. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some pictures, and I'm going to tell you his story. Frank Netter came from very humble beginnings. His parents had a stationery store in the theater district in New York, and as a little child he would go there. All the kids in the family had to work in the store before school, after school, and he would work there, and he would stack the magazines, and he would deliver the newspapers and things like that. And he would look at the pictures in the magazines, on the covers of these great magazines, and in the newspaper, you know, they didn't use photography much in those days. He was born in 1906, and so in 1915 he figured it was the golden age of illustration, and the pictures were drawn by some very, very great artists. There was J.C. Leyendecker, who had the cover of the on the Saturday Evening Post. His cover every December, he would have a picture of a New Year's baby, and there was James Montgomery Flagg did that very, very well-known poster of Uncle Sam, I Want You for U.S. Army. That picture was all over town. And Norman Rockwell was just getting his start with his covers for the Saturday Evening Post. So Frankie would look at these pictures and say, oh, what wonderful lives these people must lead. I want to be an artist too when I grow up. This is a picture that he made of his mother. She had been peeling potatoes and she had dozed off, and he went and got a pencil and drew her picture. He was about 11 years old when he made this picture. He was very close to his mother, and she said, you know, Frankie, art is a very nice thing, but it's no way for a young man to earn a living. You need to be a doctor. But she did agree that he could go to art school, and if he would keep up his grades in school, and if he couldn't make a go of art, he would go to medical school. So he found out about a place called the National Academy of Design, and he would go there in the evenings. He took his portfolio there. They didn't charge any tuition, but they had very, very high admission standards, and so he took his portfolio and they admitted him into this to study art, and he figured now he would be a real artist, because these classes were taught by some very great artists in New York. And so he went to high school during the day, the art school at night, and then when he finished high school, he went to the College of the City of New York. And this is a picture of the quadrangle at the City College, as we call it now, and it looks very much like that still today. He drew that when he was a student there. And but I must tell you that when he was after his first year of school, he got very good grades in his first year, and after his first year of school, his mother went to the hospital for a hysterectomy. She it was now 1924. She had surgery was not too different from what you might do today, what the doctors might do. But there was terrible anesthesia. Patients would retch terribly afterwards, and they had no antibiotics, 1924. And she got an infection, and she died. Well, he cried, and he cried for days. He cried, and he said, okay, that's it. I'm going to give up art, and I'm going to go to medical school. So he finished his study at City College, and he went to New York University Medical College. Now, it was very difficult then. They had to memorize everything. They got a box of bones, and they had to pass the test, or they were out. So, but Frank Netter found that he could best learn his subjects by making pictures. And so he would make the pictures, and he could learn the anatomy that way. And the classmates started asking for them pictures. Could you please make a picture for me so I could learn? And the teachers said, could you make pictures for me so I could teach? And so he made a few dollars selling his pictures while he was in medical school. He made this picture when he was in school there. This is a view from the School of the East River in New York City, and it still looks very much like that today. The activity on the river. There's a beautiful oil painting that hangs in my dining room. So he finished 4 years of medical school at New York University. He went to internship, 2-year internship at Bellevue Hospital, internship in medicine and surgery at Bellevue. Bellevue had its own ambulance service, and interns had to ride the ambulance. There were no such things as paramedics to ride an ambulance then. And they wore those white suits, and they wore those black hats, and said Surgeon Bellevue Hospital across the top of it. And they carried a reflex hammer and a notebook and a stethoscope, and went into the tenements and treated patients and carried them in the ambulance back to Bellevue. They saw a lot of things at Bellevue. There was the oldest and largest hospital in the country. He finished his internship at Bellevue, and then he signed on at Mount Sinai Hospital in the outpatient surgery department to begin the long climb to success as a doctor. Now it was 1933, the depths of the Great Depression. Nobody had any money to go to doctors. Well, if they really had to go to a doctor, they certainly wouldn't go to a young kid right out of school. And so he was moonlighting, selling his pictures. The pharmaceutical companies found out that he could make these pictures that appealed to doctors. And so he was getting about $50 a picture, which was pretty good money during the Depression, and that's what put food on the table and paid the rent. And but he felt very guilty about that. He thought he needed to be building up his surgery practice because he had decided that he was going to be a doctor. So he said, okay, I'm going to ask a ridiculous amount of money, and they won't pay it. They'll go away and leave me alone to my surgery practice. So the next advertising manager that came through the door wanted a series of 5 pictures. So Frank said, okay, I'm going to ask a ridiculous amount. I'm going to ask $300 a picture, and then he'll go away. So he told the man, he said, I need to get $1,500 for these pictures. Oh, that's a lot of money, the man said. And he went away. And Frank was sure he was done with art for good and he could be a doctor. Well, the man called him up on the telephone the next day. And he said, okay, I got permission. We will pay you $1,500 for each of the 5 pictures. So it wasn't long before he resigned from Mount Sinai Hospital to devote himself full-time to making pictures. Oh, press the wrong button. So then, in 1938, in San Francisco, they had just completed the Golden Gate Bridge and the Oakland Bay Bridge, and San Francisco and environs decided that they were going to have a big exposition to rival the World's Fair in New York, the Golden Gate Exposition in San Francisco. And the Sharing Company came to Frank and said, we want you to make an exhibit for us to showcase our work with hormones. They were the leading supplier of hormones in the world at that point. So Frank said, okay, we can showcase the female hormones. I can make the pictures of the changes in the breast from puberty through pregnancy and menstruation and pregnancy, and the changes in the breast, the changes in the uterus, and show the baby growing inside. And we put a little writing on the side of the picture, but that won't be a very interesting exhibit. And then the Sharing Company said, oh, but it must not take more than 15 minutes to walk through this exhibit. And he said, well, how are they going to read all that in 15 minutes? And it won't be a very good exhibit. But then he found out about a brand new product called plexiglass, and he said, aha, I can make a sculpture of a woman and project inside the pictures, my pictures inside, showing the hormone flows and the changes inside of her and the baby growing inside of her. And then he got the idea that he would get a synchronized recording of a woman's voice explaining what was happening at each projection. Oh, the Sharing people loved it, and she came out to be a really beautiful 7-foot-tall woman, and she had a baby every 15 minutes, and she was a big hit at the exposition in San Francisco for the full 2 years. She was there. After that, she went to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, where she continued having babies to a very advanced age. I saw her there in the 1980s, and you would really believe there was a baby growing inside of her. But we've lost track of her in the last couple of decades. Also in 1938, the Seba Company came to Frank and said, we have a brand new product, a digitalis preparation, a heart preparation. And we want to make a little flyer, die cut in the shape of a heart. And on the front of the flyer, we'll put your picture of the front of the heart. And on the back, we'll put your picture of the back or the base of the heart, and we'll open it up and there'll be a cross section of the heart, and superimposed over the pictures we'll put the product literature for this digitalis preparation. And so that's what they did. They sent that out to all the doctors in the land, and they loved it. They wrote in to Seba and said, we like that little heart flyer very much. Could you send me some more of those, but without all that writing all over it? And so that's what they did. They made a heart, and they put the writing over to the side, and they put some educational material so that the doctors could use those flyers as for patient education. And then they made other flyers for the different preparations that targeted different organs. They made one of the kidney and one of the stomach and one of the lungs, and those flyers were very popular with the doctors. This is a beautiful painting that he made of my siblings before I was born. It's a beautiful oil painting that my brother has. And after that, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and we were in World War II. And there was a great swell of patriotism. All the men were lining up to join the armed forces. And Frank knew the pathologist, the colonel who was in charge of the Army Medical Museum, which was on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. And so this man, Colonel Ash, he said, if you will join in the Army, I will get you assigned to the Army Medical Museum, because I have a lot of work for someone with your skills. And so that's what Frank did, and he signed up for the Army. They made him a captain, and he reported for duty on the National Mall in Washington. D.C. had a beautiful studio on the top floor there in that building. It was right next to the Smithsonian, and airy light, with a lot of light coming into the studio, and but he didn't have anything to do. And he would go to the colonel and say, what do you want me to do? I said, well, be patient, we'll get you something. So finally, General Weibel over at the Pentagon called up and said, Captain Netter, I understand you have a unique talent, and I want you to come right over to the Pentagon. I have a very important job that I think that you can use your talents for. So Frank went right over to the Pentagon, met with General Weibel, who's a very nice man, and he was in charge of all the training aids for the armed forces. And he took out a big book, and he threw it down on his desk, and he said, this is the Army's first aid manual. It has 20 ways to splint a broken arm, and 6 treatments for snake bite, and none of which is available in the field. I want you to simplify this, because we have 8 classroom hours to train these boys to take care of their wounds, to take care of their own or their colleagues' wounds, and they need to be able to remember what they are learning in those 8 hours. And Frank knew exactly what he would do. He made a little booklet, again, a 3x4 booklet, and he made a picture on one page and just a few bullet points on the other page, and it was very effective. The bullet points explaining what was in the picture, and they studied that, and then they could remember that. In the heat of battle, they could remember what to do to treat, to say, you know, stop the bleeding, prevent shock, and protect the wound. Those are really the 3 things about all they could do. And it was very effective, and I'm sure it saved a lot of lives during the war. So while he was there with the general, there was another doctor there who was advocating for treatment of the wounded, bringing it forward in the field, and also treatment for the wounded as they came home. And that was Dr. Michael DeBakey. And he and Frank Netter met at that time and became very lifelong friends, with very close lifelong friends, and they collaborated on some portfolios that the SIBA company published and distributed to all the doctors in the land, treatment for the wounded as they came home. And they were little portfolios, and maybe 12 pictures in each of the portfolios. So, and that was very popular with the doctors, these pictures. Dr. DeBakey lent his knowledge, and Frank did the paintings. Then in 1949, the SIBA company decided that they were going to start a publication called the Clinical Symposia, and that would be a monologue devoted to one subject, and about 30 pages, and 13 of those pages or so would be the Frank Netter pictures. And they would invite the leading clinicians, the leading researchers in the land to write these monologues, and then SIBA published them and sent them out to all the doctors in the land, and no charge, free of charge. And they were very popular. That was just to promote goodwill. It was a service to the medical community. They came out about 4, maybe 6 times a year, and they were very, very popular. He did one on surgical anatomy of the hand, which was a real masterpiece. You know, not every artist can draw hands, and Frank was a master at it. He did one on the psychiatric patients. This man is depressed, and he's got on one blue sock and one red sock, and he's just kind of a little disheveled, and with all kinds of depression in that clinical symposia. I've been showing you several of these paintings. He did 12 paintings, The Life of a Doctor. And this one is The Country Night Call. He made them for the Armour Company, and Armour also gave these away, had printed them up and gave them away as goodwill to doctors, I guess maybe at some of the medical conventions, or maybe with the pharmaceutical reps. I'm not sure how exactly they did that, but they gave them out for goodwill. But then in 1953, the SIBA company said that Frank Netter's pictures were so popular and the clinical symposia was so popular, they got the idea that they would make a series of atlases covering the entire anatomy, pathology, physiology, embryology of the human body, the whole body. And there was such a colossal project that they said that they wanted Frank to paint only for them, and not to paint for any other company, and just paint for them, and they paid him extra to do that. And so he estimated that would take about 10 years to do those atlases. And so he started working on them, and the 10 years came and the 10 years went, and he had hardly scratched the surface, and he signed another contract for another 10 years, and then another, and finally another. This is a painting that he did of the schema of the liver that he did with the great Hans Papa, who was at that time at the University of Chicago. This is the pharynx that he did with Dr. Huber, who was at Temple, and it looks like something Georgia O'Keeffe might have done, I think. Oops, let me go back there. This is a very well-known picture of a man having a heart attack, which he did with Paul Dudley White, who came to prominence as the physician to President Eisenhower. But in this picture, all the precipitating factors of a heart attack are in this picture. They have, the man has just had a heavy meal. He's coming out of the restaurant into the cold, exerting himself, going up the steps, carrying a heavy valise. It's a lot of work. He is a little bit overweight. He's a smoker. You see he dropped a cigarette here and drops his valise, and he's in terrible pain, which you can see not only in his posture but is on his face. All the precipitating factors. So I must tell you then that in 1971, Frank Netter moved to Palm Beach. And he lived then in Manalapan. And, but he was collaborating with doctors all over the country, all over the world, actually. It was great. Nobody ever turned him down. Seba would ask them, invite them to collaborate and to write the text. And Frank would make the pictures. And nobody ever turned him down because it was very prestigious by this time to work with Frank Netter. This was a picture that he did with a doctor here in Miami, Dr. Jerome Sheldon, the arteries and veins of the head and face. And here we have Dr. Epstein, Murray Epstein. So this was in this case, you had gone up. You told us that you had gone up to Palm Beach to work with him, but he came down. You were doing.
He was absolutely fascinated by an instrument we had, the water immersion tank, and after the third or fourth session, he said, "I've got to see this with my own eyes." So you can see, he had a camera, and he sketched, and he spent essentially the entire day asking people to get into the tank, to come out of the tank, and he kept sketching and photographing.
So that was interesting.
That would have been 1985.
Yeah. So by then, he had moved up to the Breakers, to live at the Breakers, moved up from Manalapan. So that was quite a drive, and he was almost 80 years old then too, drove down. Oops, I want to go back and show you this picture. So he would sketch the pictures. So he would meet with the doctors. Sometimes he never met with the doctors. Now, for example, this complicated picture, this is probably one of the most challenging pictures that he painted. This sketch is the most complicated sketch I've ever seen that he did. He would make these sketches, and then he would transfer that to the illustration board and then paint it. So he was working on this picture with the great anatomist Russell Woodburn, who was at Michigan. And so he made the sketch, and then you see on the left side at the top, he had some questions about some of the anatomy. This is a very complicated anatomy, a lot of individual variations, I understand. And so he sent that to Dr. Woodburn, just sent it in the mail to him. And then on the bottom, Dr. Woodburn wrote his answer and sent it back in the mail. And he wrote different things. You can recognize where Dr. Woodburn wrote compared to the Frank Netter writing. And these little brown spots on that, you know what that is? That's where there's a very thin tracing paper, and that's where he'd be smoking his cigar and the ash would fall down and make a little burn hole. There he is smoking his cigar at his drawing board, and this is what he looked like. He made all these pictures himself. He did over 4,000 pictures for the Seba company. That's a lot of pictures. In 40 years, you can do the math. That's about one every 3 days. That includes the research, because he couldn't make this stuff up, So he didn't have any help. He did them all himself, other than the clinicians and who would teach him what they were doing. But he didn't have anybody painting for him. So then the Seba company, by this time it was called Seba Geigy, had merged with the Geigy Corporation. And they got the idea that they had these 4,000 pictures. And so they would want, do we have enough to make a really first-class anatomy atlas just an atlas, no text, no writing with it, just the pictures. And so they found Sharon Colosino was at Columbia. She was teaching anatomy at Columbia, and they hired her to edit this volume and to select the pictures and to work with Frank on that and see what pictures were missing with it that he could do, and that there were very few that she thought he needed to make only 15 out because there were 4,000 of them. It turned out he had to make about closer to 50, but there were about 550 pictures in the atlas when it first came out, and it was really a beautiful book because now to make these pictures that had been painted over a period of 40 or 50 years looked like they all had to be painted at the same time. This was before there was digital printing and digital photography, and so that was a very big printing project and it came out. It was really beautiful, and won #1 book of the year by New York Bookbinders Association, and it's now in its 6th edition, and it's used by all the students, the medical students today all use it. Actually, all kinds of people use it. So that's all in my book, Medicine's Michelangelo. You can buy the book, and I'll be glad to sign it. Do you have any questions?
No, I studied your father's pictures when I was a medical student, and I worked with Murray in the immersion tank when I did research with Murray. I was one of Murray's fellows in another life. So your father's art was an incredible aid to all of us in medicine because, as I was saying before, you couldn't see what you were looking at sometimes with the cadavers, and you would study your father's pictures to understand the relationships of structures, and that's really what we needed to learn.
Yeah. People ask me often, along with what you're saying, that, well, why didn't they just use photography? Well, you take a picture, a photo camera doesn't know the difference between a nerve and a sinew or and so in a photograph you can't see it, and he could make it just so. He always knew what to put in the picture and what to leave out of the picture, which was sometimes more important, what to leave out of the picture to make it clear. So.
Yeah, just one anecdote that I'll add just to show what a vivid imagination and curiosity your father had. The tank that Dr. Hoffman mentioned, the genesis of that was the manned space program. That's how I came up with it, actually, because I was initially doing research with NASA. And as I related that, and then we were talking with your father only about kidney liver disease, he became absolutely fascinated and fixated. He just had to know what the relationship was with manned spaceflight, and I'll actually send it to you, one of the paintings that he made was of a mock-up of a human being during manned spaceflight on the way to the moon and sitting in that water immersion tank. And the analogy between the two is in both instances, blood redistributes so that it engorges the heart. That's how the whole thing came about. And he just your father would not let go of that. He kept hammering back and back again. He had to see it. He had to visit Johnson Space Center and all of that.
He was always looking to the future. He was always so interested in that. Yeah.
What, out of curiosity, I remember that all of the paintings that he made belonged at the time to the SIBA Foundation. Since there is no more SIBA Foundation, what finally happened?
The SIBA in his lifetime, SIBA merged. The SIBA company merged with
Sandoz.
Merged with Geigy, became SIBA Geigy.
Oh, right.
And then SIBA Geigy merged with Sandoz and became Novartis.
Right.
So Novartis has the art. Novartis has the paintings, yes, and but now Elsevier is the publisher of the books.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of Netter publications that Elsevier does, and it's interesting because when SIBA did the publication, it was always sold to the medical profession. The clinical symposia was given away, and the books that he did, those green books that I showed you, the SIBA collection of medical illustrations, that was sold at cost, whatever it cost to publish it. So they didn't make any money on it. It was just goodwill, was service to the medical profession.
Right.
So, but now, of course, they charge a lot for those books. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Francine. You're appearing tomorrow as well at...
Yes, I'm going to be at the
Colby Library at the
At the-
University of Miami Medical School.
at the medical school, University of Miami Medical School,
Great.
at the library,
Look
medical
forward to seeing you
library.
there as well. Thank you. I might add, this also reminds me of sort of Norman Rockwell-ish. Has it been
Well,
described?
he was
Compared to?
friends with Norman Rockwell, you
Wow.
know, yeah, because he moved in both worlds. He moved in the medical world, in the great teaching hospitals, and he would lunch at the Society of Illustrators.
Very. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, if you're watching online, you still have time to call the store. We'll get you an autographed copy. We'll ship it to you. For those here in the store, the books are for sale behind the counter. Francine will sit over at this table and sign them for you as well. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.